Well, it's Advent, and since it's Advent, we have an Advent wreath. And since we have an Advent wreath, there are 4 candles, and it immediately starts making people ask what the 4 candles stand for. I'm going to tell you, and I want you to promise you will never let anyone tell you anything else, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about this important bit of trivia. Those 4 candles stand for the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's it. Detour for a moment before we get to the serious part. In Lent, not Advent, in Lent, the 4th Sunday in Lent gets rose vestments, and it gets rose vestments because once upon a time, the Pope would bless roses on that Sunday. It's spring and Italy, I guess. And then the custom came of lightening the purple vestments to be rose a little bit on that midway through Lent as a kind of like relaxation. And then it became a custom to kind of imitate that in Advent. And so on the 3rd Sunday of Advent, we lighten the purple and make it a little rose. It so happens, and this is just a coincidence, really, that the first word in the Mass, on the old medieval Mass, for the 3rd Sunday of Advent is rejoice, and therefore people decided it was Joy Sunday. But only in the sense that today would be Drop Down Sunday, because the first word in the old Mass was drop down. It's not like the Mass is all about that one word, it just happens to be the first word, and that's how you would abbreviate it. And then Protestant churches started having Advent wreaths, which is a Lutheran custom, and they started coloring them in the color of the Roman Catholic vestments in churches that never used or saw rose. We only started having rose here in the past few years, but we always had the pink candle. So people would say, why is the candle pink? And they'd say, well, it's Joy Sunday, and then they would decide that candle must stand for joy. And once you do that, you're off and running, because now you have to wonder what the next 3 are going to stand for. And since the 3rd never stood for joy, you're not going to find any traditional list for the other 3 also. So you will find list upon list upon list. Faith, hope, and love. Hope, faith, and joy. We already had joy. Prayer, watching. I've seen all kinds of lists of 4 things. But what the candles stand for is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they count the season of Advent. Visually, as the outside darkness increases, imagine you're in Northern Europe here, as the outside darkness increases and the nights get longer and the days get shorter and we approach Christmas, when that starts reversing, we lighten the church progressively more and more day by day as a kind of symbolic opposition to the impending darkness. And that fits kind of well with the themes of the Advent liturgy. So I insist on it being 1, 2, 3, and 4, because the point is not little tagline words for each one, but this notion of progression and growth in light. So enough of the detour. There is a traditional set of 4 things in Advent, and I've never once heard anybody label the Advent calendar, Advent candles, after these 4 things. Go figure. But the traditional 4 topics for Advent are what's called the 4 last things. And they are heaven, hell, death, and judgment. Now, I've never heard anybody say that's the heaven candle and the hell candle and the death candle and the judgment candle, but if you want a traditional list of 4 things in Advent, that's your list. Heaven, hell, death, judgment. Now, I once had one of our fundamentalist friends ask me whether I believed in a literal hell, and I couldn't understand what on earth he meant, because literal hell doesn't make any sense, because the word is already a metaphor. It's either a Greek metaphor referring to some kind of cavernous space under the ground, and except for the one in Carlsbad, I don't really believe in that. And then there's the Jewish Gehenna, which is the garbage dump outside Jerusalem. I do believe in garbage dumps, but I don't think that's what my friend was asking me. It's very strange to ask that question. It's like whether you believe in the literal right hand of God. Did anybody ever mean that as a literal right hand of God? No. So what are we to do with this language? Did Dante, by the way, believe in a literal hell? I have no idea, because he's writing a metaphorical poem. Heaven, hell, death, and judgment. Well, let's take them in reverse order, because today's readings are all about judgment. Isaiah starts off asking that the skies will be ripped apart and that God will come down and light everything on fire, because everything is wrong. The world around him is falling apart, and he desperately cries out for God's intervention to make clear to the world who is right and who is wrong, and to set things to rights. And the choir's anthem, which is, by the way, from that drop-down Sunday, is what's called the Advent prose. And it's in similar language. Drop down, you heavens from above, and let the skies pour down righteousness. Let the earth open up and blossom forth salvation. So it's a little more agricultural and a little less fire, but it's the same idea. God, come flying out of heaven, come flying out of the sky, rip things apart and make clear who is right and who is wrong and where justice lies, so that everyone can recognize it. The arguments about Ferguson bring this home to me, because there's an awful lot of fighting about where justice lies. And an awful lot of people who are pretty sure that if only God, and it's always going to be on our side, if only God would come down and make clear that we are right, whoever we is, everybody will recognize that, and we can stop fighting and getting on to making things better, because nobody thinks things are okay. That's what Isaiah is calling for. In fact, if you look at the Psalms, when the language of judgment comes, there's two themes that come up over and over again. One of them is that God is a righteous judge and that is defined as one who sits in judgment every day. Not because God is always doing this at people, but because God is a judge who is not closed for business. But when you need justice, God is always there. God is not busy playing golf. God's court is always ready when you need it. When you are oppressed, God is there. That's the first theme. And the other is to beg God for judgment. Because when you need a judge, you want that judge to be fair and impartial on your behalf. So judgment, the fourth of our Advent themes, is called for by Isaiah, and it immediately moves into a recognition of the problem, which is that when I call down God's judgment and I have the least smidgen of honesty, I know that I'm not going to be exempt. I know that, as our collect says, I have some of the works of darkness carried around me, and I need to take them off. I need to put on the armor of light. Judgment is not for them, it turns out. In Isaiah's mind, judgment is for us. And in fact, it's an us that includes both them and us. All humanity, as Isaiah finally comes to say. In that amazing passage, starting out with a call for God to rip the heavens and come down and put things to right, Isaiah comes immediately to the recognition that his own nation and his own self and all of humanity is part of the problem, and that judgment is not just going to be a matter of God pointing the finger at the people who are wrong and shooing them away. Well, what about death? It's going to happen. I've said before, maybe you've heard it, sometimes we use this phrase that someone saved someone's life as if now they won't die. can't actually save someone's life. You can just preserve it for a little bit longer than it otherwise would have been. I'm not really interested in beating up on language here, but it's worth keeping in mind that we are mortal. And this Advent theme was always the old memento mori, that weird custom of carrying around a little skull or something. Remember that you are of the dust, is the Ash Wednesday words. And to dust you will return. Judgment brings us to think of that, or it ought to. Because judgment that saves our life may be judgment that costs someone else theirs. And in God's judgment, that strategy is never okay. So God is playing the long game, as it were, and willing to give it as much time as it takes for a judgment and a justice to be realized on earth that includes everyone in its grasp, those who are right and those who are wrong. Because each human being is among those who are right and among those who are wrong. And if you think of the conflicts that rend our world, you can see this dynamic in Ferguson. You can see this dynamic in an immigration ballot in Switzerland. You can see this dynamic in the Gaza Strip. When we look honestly, we know that everyone has plenty to repent of, and everyone has plenty of which they have been the unjust victim of. And it's true in our own personal lives as well. In family dynamics, in those family members that have died, and there is no more chance to say, I'm sorry for that thing I did. So if there's a preparation theme to Advent, that whole getting ready for Christmas thing, we can wait for future weeks. Let's get ready for the rest of our lives instead, not just 1 month. So what about hell? I've seen it. I don't mean I've seen it like those medieval mystics who had these terrifying visions of fiery places of torture. I mean I've seen fiery places of torture in Los Angeles. I've seen people whose sense of depression is a hell that they carry around them, sometimes the only thing they can hang on to. I've seen people in pain of illness. I've seen people in pain of broken relationships. I've seen people in great poverty. I've seen people who the world should count fortunate, happy, and blessed, but who feel themselves to be the lowest of all. And I'll bet you've seen these things too. They are part of the world around us. They are, in fact, what cries out for judgment. They are what cries out for God to split the heavens apart and come down and pour down not just rain on a thirsty state, but righteousness. Oh, for a nor'easter of justice. So what about heaven? I've seen that too. I've seen it because I've seen love that is stronger than death. I've seen it because I've seen the power of resurrection in people's lives. I've seen it because I've seen people who were struggling with addiction and now live lives that are fulfilling and compassionate and open to others. I've seen it because I've seen people who were dying and surrounded by nothing but faith and love, and knew themselves to be in the arms of a tender God who would never, ever let them go. I've seen heaven because I've seen the church. which for all of its sins has also through the ages been a place where anybody can walk through the doors. It's one of the most beautiful things about this parish that all week long those doors are not locked. And this building is used. And for people who come in who we never see on a Sunday morning, but they are here every single day and they say their prayers every single day, this place functions as heaven. And for us who do come week by week, I think it does that too. So as every Sunday we celebrate the power of resurrection, we celebrate a Christ who could not be defeated by death, who put death under his feet, who triumphed over death, whose judgment ultimately is only mercy, whose justice is for everyone, and who has vanquished hell forever.